Hi, and welcome to the Parenting Playbook podcast. Today I have Tara with me, who is a social media and marketing management expert, and she has a business called Ask Tara. So, Tara has a really complex family. She has six children, three of which are her partner's children, one of which she has a foster daughter, and she has two biological children with her partner. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Tara's journey and her experiences of being a child and also the challenges that she faced when she became a mum. So welcome, Tara. It's so lovely to have you here. So tell me a little bit about this really complex family that you have.
Thank you for having me. So I have a bit of a complex family. I started the foster care journey before meeting my partner with my ex-partner actually. And we took in a 2-week placement who turned out to be forever. And so when I separated from my partner and was a single mum for a bit and then met my current partner, I went from having my foster daughter to his 3 girls so then we had 2 boys together. So there are 5 to 6 children in our household. We have one stepdaughter who just struggles with the adjustment. And so she lives with her mum. Depending on the day, depends on whether or not she wants me to say that she's mine. But yeah, there's 5 to 6 kids in our family.
Can you give me the ages of the children? Because that can be really complex if we've got older children and younger children in the same household as well.
Yeah, I have every life stage. I have an 18-year-old, that's my foster daughter, my 17-year-old stepdaughter, 16-year-old stepdaughter, 10-year-old stepdaughter, and then a 6-year-old and an almost 3-year-old.
Wow. So that can be really complex, can't it? Because I know in my blended family, we had a 7-year-old and a 14-year-old. Trying to navigate family days out could be
So
a little bit tricky. So I suspect it's really tricky for you.
yeah, it's great because I have like helping hands in the big girls. Like the big girls are incredible, and I love watching how they interact with the little ones, and I love seeing how much the little ones absolutely adore their big sisters. But yeah, going out and having a group time together is often tricky because not everyone wants to do the same thing. It's hard in the blended family sense, I feel like, because my middle, I call her my middle child, but my 10-year-old is kind of like an island in the middle. She's not big enough to be with the big girls and she's too old to be the boys. And so she's kind of always like stuck in this limbo land of like what to do. And she's very at that age of comparison. And so she often will look at different things and be like, you love them more, or you do this. Why do the girls get expensive shoes? Or I'm always trying to tell them, like, I love them all the same. And I parent you where you're at. Like, I parent you where you're at this particular point in time. So it's not about everyone gets the same thing because it's too hard to make it a blank rule with all of these different ages. It is more that we meet each challenge based on where our children's capacity and how they're coping.
And I think this is really, really important because we hear this a lot, don't we? And I've certainly had this in my home where, but you treat him differently to how you treat me. And I think it's really important to explain to our children that we cannot parent each child in exactly the same way because they're unique in their own right. And actually, we're doing them a disservice if we're parenting them all the same because the genders are different, the ages are different, the time is different. Actually, every child has different parents. And it's so true because we're in a different economic status, we're different in age, everything is
Mhm,
different. But explaining that to children can be really difficult, can't it? Because they do that thing of, well, why does that one get away with that when I don't? Whatever it
mhm.
happens to be, and as you say, how you're showing up for them as well.
And I think as well, like my foster daughter got a different me to my voice. So she was my only child and I was working full time and we had a great disposable income and she got all of the benefits of that. And she got all of me all of the time from the age of 8 till about 12. And so then when it became like she was one of many, there was still the same amount of time because they would go to their mums or there'd be other things happening and we'd have one-on-one time. But then the boys came along. And obviously my energy levels are very different after going through newborn periods and sleepless nights and whatnot. So she's kind of seen like this been a shift and she's like the love is still there. So it's all fine. But she looks at how I am with the little ones and like she'll say things to me like, oh my God, you're raising iPad kids. And she'll have all these little judgments at me. And I'm like, man, you haven't had a kid yet. and and I am tired. I do not have boundless energy like I did when I raised you. Like,
But you're right. I mean, raising a child 18 years ago is very different to raising a child now. So tell me a little bit about childhood, how you were parented, and also that journey through having your first child to then having your younger children now. And because I suspect you're super aware, aren't you? And I suspect you can see the shifts and changes that you've made throughout that time. So can you tell me a little bit about your story?
yeah, I guess my parents were very old-fashioned parents, and they were older parents. So both my parents are now passed away, but if they were alive, my dad would be 74 and my mom would be 70. So compared to like my partner's parents, they're a lot older. His grandfather, I think, is like 79. So they're
Wow.
definitely older and he's quite young. So they were very old-fashioned and very strict. We were very poor. So my dad was a very big gambler and a very big drinker, and he didn't want my mum to work, but he had a steady job until he was about 40, and then he was unemployed for almost 10 years, I think. And then he struggled to maintain regular employment. So we didn't have a home phone growing up. There was no landline. We didn't have a car. But we used to have people come visit the house and give us, vouchers for groceries and electricity and gifts for Christmas and things like that. So we were very kind of disadvantaged. That being said, my mum tried very hard for us not to feel that way, and she used to make all kinds of things to like give us presents and whatnot. But my dad would like my dad controlled the finances, not in a manipulative sort of controlling stance that he got paid. And if he didn't come home with that money and he stopped by and had some beds, we might not have had money to pay the rent. So we moved often, and there was always like something going on. So it wasn't probably until an adult that I realized like the extent of how bad things were. Or my partner actually said to me the other day, "Did your dad always look out the window?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like he'd always be like, "Who's in the driveway? Who's driving past? Like, who's here?" A bit like he'd gotten into trouble and he was always like
Mm.
waiting for someone to like come and have an issue with him. And I wouldn't doubt that he was getting into trouble because he had a loud mouth and he got into trouble a lot. So he committed suicide when I was 15.
How old would he
And
have
then from there,
been at that
but he
time?
was 51.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So he was quite young and it was kind of a hard time in that it was a shock. As now I look at it and I'm like, how did we not see it? But I was surrounded by adults who refused to acknowledge mental health issues and refused to see issues. They were just like, oh, he just likes to have a good time. Like everyone kind of said, oh no, John, he would never do that. Like he would never do that. Something else happened. He would never have done that. He gassed himself in our family car. So it was very obvious what he'd done. But everyone really around me, I watched all these adults get quite confused and argue that that just didn't happen, which was confusing. But I look back now, my father slept on the lounge every night. I have like two memories of my dad ever sleeping in the same bed as my mum. Other than that, he slept on the lounge. He would drink wine from like a tumbler cup, like a tall cup. He would drink multiple wines a night until he fell asleep. And he would wake up at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and get ready and go to work. Even though he didn't start till 6, he would just stand up there really early. And that's how he lived his life. Like he had lots of anxiety, which I think presented in him being quite like strict and angry and cranky, which I look at now as a child. I used to hate it. But now I look at my anxiety, and my anxiety when I'm at my worst will present in a similar way. I just need everyone to do what I ask you to do and just do it now. Like I need
Well,
to control everything,
yeah.
lock it down.
But if you think about it, that makes complete sense because we go into fight or flight mode, and the relationship between anger and anxiety is very, very close because we go into fight mode. So, just out of
Yeah.
interest, when you think about your dad's parents, for example, can you see how and why he was the way he was and why he had all of these coping mechanisms that he was leaning towards and the anxiety that came with that?
I don't know a lot. My grandfather passed when my dad was young. He had, I believe, complications from diabetes. He had type 1 diabetes and he'd lost a leg due to that. And then he had some other complications and he passed young. I've heard a few stories about how old he was. Some people tell me, oh, he's 51. Everyone thinks 51 in the family. And my aunt said, no, that's not the case. She believes that he was older than that. My nan lived till she was 99, and I didn't have a huge relationship with her growing up. She didn't drive, and she lived in Glebe, which is towards the city from us, about an hour away. And we didn't see her a whole heap. My mother didn't like her. So after my dad passed, we never saw her. It wasn't until I was an adult and living at a home that I went and sought her out and found her, and I would see her regularly. For me, I used to say that she was very English. So sorry. And she had stiff upper lip, very stiff upper lip. Like, let's not get messy. Let's keep it calm. Let's just not get messy. I remember turning up on her doorstep, quite upset after having an argument with my mum on the phone. And at that point said to my mum, don't call me anymore. Done. Don't want to talk to you. And for a long period of time, I didn't speak with my mother. And I turned up on my nan's doorstep, really upset, and like kind of explained what happened. And she was like, oh dear. And then she just didn't really have anything else to say about it. She was just like, made me a cup of tea, patted me on the knee, and that was it. So I kind of see where he didn't have any emotional regulation because I don't think he was shown any. There was no acceptance or acknowledgement of feelings. He was definitely raised, like he was born in 1948. So he was raised in an era of men don't have mental health issues, men don't cry. And I, from talking to I believe like he had this drive to always be more than what he was. He always tried to live beyond his means. He always wanted more, but he had like this giant inferiority complex that looked like he thought he was better than everyone, but he actually just really had no confidence. And I remember he would be very easily threatened by other, like my friends' parents. So if my friends' parents were well educated, if they didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they, I don't know, had like a desk job maybe as a man, my dad would be like, oh, what is that person? Or he'd have names for them or tear them down a bit like they thought that they were better than him.
Mm.
And they probably didn't even have any of those thoughts, but he had a lot of insecurity around that.
Yeah, so a lot of low self-esteem, and it's not a huge leap if we think about it, because you were talking about your grandfather being type 1 diabetic, losing a leg, and your dad probably was pretty young at that point. So how your grandfather showed up for your dad, it could have been questionable because of his illness. So, and I think people struggle with it to understand that if we haven't had a solid role model, or if we've lost a parent from a very young age, and this will be interesting actually coming back to you, because having lost your dad at the age of 15, often we don't know what being a father is if we haven't had a father. So, for example, if we think about for you that you lost a father at 15, you knew what a father looked like, your version of what a father looked like up until the age of 15. But once your children got beyond 15, it might have been a little bit of a confusion as to how does your partner show up for your children? And that
Mhm.
because we don't have any internal barometer as to what that even looks like. So it sounds like dad may have gone through something quite similar, in a sense of what is a father over the age of X whenever he lost his own father. And actually, because his father had health issues, I suspect it would have been difficult for his father to have been that typical father figure. So really tough
Yeah.
history in your family.
Yeah. A lot of generational stuff. And I think as well, like, if you think of like the ages, so he's been born in 1948. He's considered a baby boomer. I think his dad was at one stage in a war. He wasn't like, they weren't raised by their fathers. Like their mums did it all. Their dads were just kind of there. And I think for my dad, that was it. My mum did all of the heavy lifting. My dad was the disciplinarian. That was the, you wait till your father gets home. And he was very strict in that. Like strict. Like he used to keep a riding crop behind our back door. And he would say to my mum, go get the crop. So he would like smack us with like a riding crop, like a horsewhip, if we were in trouble. And other than that, I don't really like, he was just around. So, like if he was at work, he was at work. And when he was at home, he was on the lounge. Like there wasn't really much in between. Like sometimes we'd go shopping all together, but not very often because we didn't have a lot of money. I think once he took me to the movies with my brother. Other than that, everything was my mum.
Yeah.
So I don't think he had to be a parent because he probably didn't get parented by a dad, like by a father. Like he didn't see what fathering could be. And I, like, as you were saying, like, it probably is different for me. It's even different for me with the little people because I, my dad didn't do any of those things. And my husband was a single dad doing all the things with three girls, like doing their hair and trying to get them ready and fumbling through as best as he could, but always like showing up and always cooking dinner and doing all those things. And he probably has kind of like, in some ways, there are times where he'll kind of ease back off, like, and go back into the patterns of like, you're here, you're cool, like, you've got it. But he still showers my boys and gets them ready for bed. And like, he still is quite hands on in a lot of facets of parenting. And it is more of a partnership than I ever witnessed with my parents.
Do you find that there are times that you still look and go, "Wow, wow, he that's what dads do."
Yeah, well, sometimes like I think I get to that point where it's almost like I feel a bit apologetic that like I don't do more. And then I think, why do I need to do more? Like I'm carrying the mental load. I carry the mental load for everyone, not just him, but all of the kids, all of their things, all of their appointments, all of whatever. Like I've already been carrying a lot. And even though a lot of what I do is not maybe physical, it's like invisible work behind the scenes, making sure everyone's got what they need and all the appointments are done, all those sorts of things. There are times where I get really kind of like, oh, maybe he shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I have to do that. Or I feel bad because I've asked you to change the nappy. And I think then I feel kind of like check myself and be like, no, you made that kid too. Not just from me.
And this is where it's so important to question those things, isn't it? Because you could very easily just have repeated that pattern of you are the mother, you're the one that does everything, you hold everything together. Your partner is also a child, essentially, because you're having to look after them. And I love the
Yeah.
fact that you check yourself. And so often we have to check ourselves when we
Yeah.
move into these archetypal ways of doing things, and that's incredible, and that really helps to bring a relationship together, I think, because if well, we hear this all the time that women talk about having their husbands are like their third child. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, but how did that happen? Because that's not just one person that has created that dynamic. As women, we do have it in our cells this idea that we're in the cave, we look after all of the children, and the men are the hunter gatherers. That's part of our, evolution and our primal way of doing things. And we do have to check ourselves and go, actually, they are perfectly capable of looking after themselves, us, and the children. And we have to
Mhm.
lean into that a little bit more and empower them to do that because we can seriously disempower men. If we don't actually check ourselves, we can seriously disempower men and
Yes.
complain about the fact that they don't do anything when we've actually played a part in that.
Yeah. And I feel like that's like an easy way to break contempt.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
and I
yes.
think like for my last relationship, it was a lot like that. Like in the early days was, that honeymoon period and it was a bizarre relationship, I have to say. Like we went on our first date, great, lovely, had a great time. Second date, he ended up coming to my house and then he just never left.
Oh,
And I think it was like we were together for, I don't know, 7 years or something. But it was definitely one of those things where I think I was trying to be like the best girlfriend
yeah.
and doing all the things that it wasn't until like 2 years in that I realized he knew how to cook.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so you do know how to do this, and you could be doing this with me. But there were lots of things that I think I just took on the load of doing,
Yeah.
and then eventually got to a point where I was like, you just take it for granted, and we're not an equal partnership,
Mhm.
um, and it just didn't work. So I think coming into my relationship with Ty, I was always very cautious of like this needs to be I want a partner. I didn't end a relationship and become a single mom to find another relationship the same. I'm ready to level up. I want a partner, someone who can meet me as an equal, someone who's not going to make me small, someone who's going to understand. And he is definitely more of a partner. And I think it is, Molly, we have to always just be checking in because there are times where, like I said, he's kind of gone, you've got it. Like you're capable, you're strong, you have it. And so he just goes about doing what he does. And I have to kind of go, hey, just so you know, the majority of the children in this house are yours and not mine.
Yeah.
Look,
Yeah. Yeah.
please help.
Absolutely. And I'm really interested in where you got that level of awareness from. And I'm mindful that you said earlier that you didn't have a relationship with mum for a while. Can you tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about that? Because I'm just thinking about mum and dad, and yet you've come out of this with this sense curiosity about how to do it differently.
Yeah. I think it's just always been there. My mum my mum is a lovely woman, but she was full of trauma. Like, I remember thinking I remember being maybe 4 or 5, and I remember, like, tickling her and her saying, "Don't do that." And I did it again and her snapping at me and said, "Don't touch me." And I remember a thought straight away in my head that was, "Something happened to you."
Oh,
And I
really?
was 4 or 5 years little. I remember thinking, "Something happened to you." And, like, I found out later in life that she had been abused by her father, who was an alcoholic, and he had abused some of her other siblings as well. And she never really got help. And again, it's the era that she grew up in. And she did a short career in psychiatric nursing in the time that they would lock women up for hysteria and do horrible things and electric shock therapy and all those sorts of things. So she would always say to me, "I don't need help. I used to be a psychiatric nurse. I know what's going on because I used to be a psychiatric nurse." And I was like, "Okay." So I think when my dad was alive, I think he kind of kept the lid a little bit on a lot of her insecurities. Because after he died, she just couldn't cope. I spent a lot of time parenting her. She leaned heavily on my brother, who was only 13 months older than me, to the point where I remember being out trying to get groceries one day and the ATM took her card and she was screaming at my brother, "What do I do? What do I do?" And he was 16 or 17. I said to her, "How would he know? He doesn't even have a bank card, mum. Why don't you go to the bank?" It was just kind of surreal how much she kind of lent on him. And I'd say that we had a bit of a codependent relationship. They were very much like together all of the time. So I don't know. I think that I've always been the child that was always looking at other people. So I was often at other people's houses and I would be going to my friends' houses and having sleepovers and starting to see that their families did not run like our family, that
Mm.
their dads did not sleep on the couch, that their parents didn't chain smoke, that their parents didn't drink themselves to sleep every night, that they didn't speak the way that my parents spoke to me, that it wasn't normal to, I remember as a little kid doing something, don't even know, like maybe I had some back chat, whatnot. I would have been 6 or 7. And I remember hearing my parents talking about me from my bedroom and my dad saying that she's such a bitch and things like that. And I remember hearing that like when I was little, I think I would never say that. I'm never going to say that.
Yeah.
And so when going to other houses and like seeing like my friends mouth off to their parents and their parents having, I guess what I probably have as a reaction now, which is more like a let's not feed into that. Let's just
Mhm.
walk away about it another time reaction and being kind of gobsmacked that they didn't get smacked across the face or end up grounded or have serious consequences in front of their friends. So I think the fact that I was always out and doing stuff, whereas my brother was happy to stay at home and he was very insular. He only really had the same friends the whole way through school and they did the same things. He doesn't really look around him for that sort of stuff. He's not that sort of person. So I was always asking questions. I was always opinionated, much to my mother's annoyance. And I also noticed that she made me, there was very much a female male thing in our household. Like I had to wash my clothes, I had to put my clothes away, I had to fold them, whatever, all that sort of stuff. I had to manage that. My brother would have his clothes washed and folded and put on his bed neat and tidy for him to put away. I remember from a young age knowing how to make coffee, how to butter bread, how to make toast, how to do all these things. And I remember going to a fundraiser when my brother was 17 and I was 16 at school. And it was a sausage sizzle, like a sausage barbecue. And he had to butter bread and he didn't know how.
Well,
And I was like, how, we're in the same house. Like, how do you not know how to butter bread?
but
He
it
didn't know how to make coffee.
but you can see how that has you said that your parents were post-war babies, still the 50s were very women did all the house stuff, men just went
Mm,
and earned the money, and you can see how that has just bounced down the generation. And what I think is really interesting about what you said about your mum's childhood. So dad was really abusive, alcoholic, and interestingly, although your dad was different, actually he had very similar traits. So alcoholism,
Yeah.
mental health issues. And people,
Mhm.
it's really interesting because we do marry a version of our mother or our father if we're not aware that we want to do it
Yeah.
differently. So essentially, she married a diluted version of her own father. So,
Yeah.
and he probably married a diluted version of his mother, I suspect, in your mum.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
so fascinating how we see that. But interestingly, as extended families, we don't see that link. It becomes the norm. And what you're saying,
Mhm.
I think, is even as a young child, you use the term normal. And I think normal is a really odd word, isn't it? Because our
Yeah.
normal is what we're experiencing. But you had an awareness at quite a young age that, yeah, this isn't how I want to do life. And it sounds like you became really curious, really young.
Mhm. And I think as well, like I remember my mum having an argument with one of our neighbors because she had to go do something and she'd asked the neighbor to watch me, but the neighbor was going out and she was asking her husband to watch me. And my mum was furious. I remember me not being minded. I went with my mum and I never really understood. And I think I was a little bit older and I started getting upset because my dad would take my brother everywhere and he would never take me anywhere. And that's when, like, I started to realize, that there was something else happening. And when I was a teenager, my mum explains that she never left me alone. So it's kind of one of those things that I think, like, there are lots of little bits kind of like that you don't realize as a child exactly what's going on, but I could pick up that there was an issue. My mum had an issue with this thing, and I didn't understand why or how, but I remember it being, like, this big issue to her and upsetting her. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like we ended up becoming estranged couple of times, but the big part for me was just I just got tired of being the person that had to constantly put out the fires or constantly helping her. Like she would organize parties. She'd organize like a big party and invite, like she'd say, "Why don't you have a Christmas party?" And she'd invite her work friends and she'd tell me to invite all my friends and we'd be getting ready for the party all day. And then 5 minutes before they walked in the door, she would be hysterically sobbing and telling me she wanted to die. And I'd just be looking at her like,
Mm,
you got to pull it together, lady, because you've
mm,
got people coming to the door, and you have no right saying that
mm,
to your child who has lost their other parent to suicide. Like, let's pull it together. Let's make it happen because I'm not having this conversation. But that used to be pretty much a pretty standard thing of her telling me that this was the only reason she lived or that she wanted to die. And
oh,
every time I'd say to her, "Well, you need to talk to the doctors. You need help." No, I don't need help. I was a psychiatric nurse. It just was a constant in my life. And I had at that stage moved away and was living in the city. And I had lived even further away for a period of time. And I just got done with it. And I remember having this argument, a stupid argument. It wasn't even like really a big one, but it was about, I think, a speech at my brother's engagement party that I have an older half brother that's my dad's son and that he gave this speech at the engagement party that apparently was very embarrassing and it really upset my brother. And my mum was very emotional about it and was so unfair and it wasn't kind. This was several weeks later. And I was like, has Damien said he has an issue or is this just you having an issue? And she just kept going, oh, poor, like about my brother. And I was like, man, I'm done. I
mm,
said, he's 32 years of age. He needs to get over it. Like, he has a problem. He's a grown adult and he can raise his issue with his other brother.
mm,
Like, you don't need to get involved. We don't need to be involved. Let's just be done. And it was just kind of like, it just got heated. In the end, I was like, yeah, I can't do it anymore. So I think I didn't talk to her maybe for like 2 years. And then I met my partner and life had kind of settled and I missed her. I used to say to my cousin, I had orphan days where there were days where I was just miserable and thought, I don't have anyone. There's no one in the world that has to love me. There's no one in the world who's first to do that for me. So eventually got to a point where I started talking to her again. And then there was another issue, and not a huge thing, but it was just something that got blown up on her side of things. And I was in the process of being assessed to become a foster carer. And I just thought, I'm about to be a parent. I can't help kids who need help if I'm constantly being pushed off my stability by you. So I was like, I can't. So that ended then. And then probably a couple of years later, I started to talk to her again. And I remember her saying to me, do you know how hurtful it is to have your daughter not talk to you? And I remember thinking, I didn't say it because I knew it wasn't going to be helpful. But I remember thinking, like, do you know how hurtful it is to have your mother not even attempt to contact you, to know where you are, to know where you live, to know your phone number, to know your emails, to know where you work, and never once reach out and try and build a bridge.
Mm.
And it always has to be me building this bridge to you and fixing things. So at that stage, she had moved away to another state. And we probably from there had a decent relationship for some time because it could be kept very light. I got to the point where if she got a little bit too messy, I'd be able to say, "Oh, Mom, I got to go now. I'm so sorry. Like, just got home," and just end the call. And I think very quickly she started to kind of realize that we're not going to go there again. We're just going to keep this light. We're going to have this lovely small talk, superficial relationship that still has a lot of love behind it, but it just doesn't get into the messy topics. And then she sadly passed away in her sleep when I was pregnant with my first child. She was 65. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And I think your story isn't unusual, is it? I think when parents have experienced deep trauma, and it sounds like both of your parents experienced deep trauma, they simply don't have the capacity to be the parent, to be the one that's got your back. And
Yeah.
when people come through that dynamic, often we end up being really resilient and really strong individuals. But it doesn't change the fact that we all want that safe place to land. And when you haven't had that, and I think there's a lot of estrangement now between parents and children. And what's I think is really interesting is that people really do need to hear that no child wants to be estranged from their parent. It takes an awful lot of pain and it takes people to their limits to have to get to a point that they have to remove
Mhm.
themselves from their parent. That is certainly
Yeah.
not the first port of call. I think many kids go through a lot of pain before they go, for my own overall well-being, I cannot do this anymore. But interestingly, what you just said there is it's almost like, well, you were the bad girl because you're the one that had removed yourself from your mum without really
Mhm.
any insight there from her as to why that might have been. And that's really tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't know, I look at it and I just think like there's nothing in this world that would stop me from getting to my kids. Even if they say, you need a complete personality overhaul when you're with me, I'd be like, right. I'd be angry in that initially. I'd be upset. I'd be hurt, but I would do whatever it takes to be near them. And even like I said, I have a stepdaughter that I raised that she hasn't been to our house for some time. I still see her in social aspects. We're still polite. We're still kind. Even for her, she's not biologically mine. She's not always been the easiest to raise. I would never wish her harm and I would never kind of refuse her from my life. And she's been very tricky. You know, there's been violence and aggression and lots of different things. So there's been a lot there that's kind of like I would understand. I could see like why you wouldn't want to see like no one would want to have to do with her. But for me, she's still a child. And there are lots of like extenuating circumstances and trauma on her side
Mm.
that make it tricky for her, as well as an undeveloped, like not a fully developed brain.
Yeah.
Like she's making decisions based on fear and anger. And if she reached out tomorrow and needed us, like I would be like, yes, that's fine. Like we'll be there. Come over.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's when we're talking about unconditional love, isn't it? But I think when people are in a place of trauma and managing their own trauma, it's very difficult to love unconditionally. And that is what our children need. Our children need to know that it doesn't matter where they are in the world, what they do, we will love them. We might not like what they do, but we will always be there for them. And that
Yeah.
is a really unique form of love, in my opinion, between parent and child. Our
Yeah.
children don't love us unconditionally back. They just don't.
No,
And that's
I think they do until a certain age. Until 13.
well,
13 is the age, I think.
I think it actually because it's about survival. Our children
Yeah.
adapt because they actually need us. They need us as a
Mm.
result of their survival. And I think this is where we, as parents, we can really misunderstand that. We assume that our children will always be with us and they will always love us. No. If we don't respect them, if we don't treat them in the way that they deserve to be treated, our children have the capacity to step away from us. And going back to what you said earlier, of when you got into your relationship with your partner and you had your foster daughter, you slipped into that pattern as well, didn't you? Of I should do everything, I should be the best person ever, and
Mhm.
he should be able to. So again, from a diluted perspective, you picked up some of those patterns before you checked yourself and went, maybe
Yeah.
not.
Thank you. I'm out. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely like that. And I think as well, like my foster daughter had lots of mum issues. She had a mum who was she is removed from, but a mum who like doesn't show up, doesn't come to contact, isn't available, like doesn't take the time to see her, has kind of moved on with her life. And I think in that instance, helping her through a lot of those hurts was an easy way for me to share my situation with her as well. And it was kind of like a really good bonding situation for us. Like we have a similar mum wound, and helping her and going to her psychology sessions and doing all of that stuff with her definitely, I think, helped me to work out what I needed or how I needed to kind of and say move on because I feel like it's always there. That wounds that you have like from your parents, I think as much as you can have lots of therapy and do lots of work, it's still kind of there. It happens as a child. It's just always going to be there. Definitely helps me to understand more. And it helps me then again with my stepchildren have a complex mum. And so it's something that again is conversations that happen a lot in our house. Your mums love you, but they are limited.
Yeah,
And if they can't love themselves, then they don't have a lot more love to give other people.
yeah,
And if they're struggling to provide that love into their own bodies and to recognize their own like brilliance,
yeah,
then they just don't have it to share with you.
yeah,
So don't feel like it's you. You're not the issue here.
yeah. They
It's
love you.
just they're
She loves.
limited.
Yeah, she loves you as much as she is
Yeah.
able to. And again, I think people
Yeah.
misunderstand that. They think that we should all love each other in a particular way. Love is a very complex subject. That's a whole different episode, that one. But you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's accepting that we have the mother or the father that we have, not necessarily the one we want. I'm just interested in something you said a moment ago and how you could relate to your foster daughter. Was there ever a part of you that because I'm a bit of a believer that if we have all of the answers within us, we just need to go searching, get curious, and listen. I'm just wondering because you said about that correlation of was there a time that you would sit and think, well, what would I have needed? I was in a similar situation to her. What would I have needed, and how do I provide that for her right now? Was there any ever that narrative?
Yeah. Not probably similar situations, but just times like tricky times in parenting where I'd often think, what did I want my mum to do?
Mm.
And then oftentimes I think, what would my mum do? And then I'm like, we don't do that. So I did have a time with my foster daughter who I found her searching up things on the internet. But she was young and curious. So she was 10. She was of that age where they were talking about sex ed and stuff, and she was curious. But I'd found that she'd done some searching that didn't land in a great place, that just wasn't good. And she knew I caught her, even though I hadn't made it clear that I had. She just knew that she'd been caught. And when I went in, I remember like freaking out and just thinking, oh, what am I going to say? Oh,
Mm.
I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared for this. I'm 2 years in. I'm not ready for this talk yet. And so I was trying to think of what I would say and what I would do. And I remember thinking, well, my mum would shame me. She
Mm.
would come in and she would shame me. She would tell me I was dirty, that I was disgusting. She would have just made it all about like sin and that I was foul. That would have been it. And I was, well, I don't want her to feel that way. I don't want her to feel like she can do this stuff, but I want her to understand that curiosity is okay and come and ask me and I can help you. I don't want her to think she can't talk to me. So I remember sitting with her and talking about it and we talked about all the different things. And then we talked about when we search things on the internet, it's not so great and all this other stuff. That's probably the biggest one. The first time that I had a big thing that I remember thinking, oh God, what would she do? I'm not doing that.
Mm.
That's going to be the definite, let's the opposite of that. But yeah, I think a lot of the time for me, it's, I think about how I would feel. And sometimes when you make mistakes, I already know now as an adult, there are times where I've messed up and I feel horrendous that I've messed up. And I know that I've messed up and I know I'm already doing the inner work to do that's never happening again because I don't want to be back in this place. It doesn't feel good. I don't need people to beat me up about that. I want someone to hold me accountable,
Mm.
and then I want to be understood after that. So I want it to be like well, that wasn't great. You could have made some better choices, but it's okay. How about we strategize how to fix it, or what do you need, sort of thing. And I think for my ex's credit, his parents are incredible. And there was a time where I lost my job. They called me up and they said, "We want to be your soft place to land."
Oh,
And I'll never forget that. And I was like, that's something that I always want my kids, especially my big kids now, to understand that we're always going to be the soft place to land. It doesn't matter what happens. We're
mm,
going to be here. We're going to help you. And the other thing we have in our house is if you tell me what's going on without me having to find out myself, truthfully and openly, there's no consequences.
yeah,
We'll fix it.
yeah.
We'll work together. We'll fix it. I'm going to hold you accountable to things, but we'll fix it. And so that's always been a big thing in our household as well. Even for the little people, we use it
Yeah.
for them as well.
I think when we make mistakes, as you just said, that we can beat ourselves up enough. We don't need somebody else beating us up. And we certainly don't need to be punished for the mistakes that we've made. The internet is a classic example. She wouldn't have known what was going to pop up. And
Mhm.
going back to your mum, if we think about it, shame can often come from a place of fear. When we shame somebody, in order to stop you from doing that, if you had done that, it would be to shame you into it. Probably
Mhm.
comes from a place of fear, like you had, of what's happened? Oh, what have they said? What has she seen? But rather than come from that place of, I need to go and nurture her and make sure she's okay, maybe your mum would have come from a place of terror of, I don't know how to deal with this. I need her to just stop and not
Yeah.
actually go much beyond that. And this is where emotional intelligence is so, so important, and working out why we're being triggered. And as you really articulately put there, you can feel that. What's going to happen? What has she seen? But hang on, how do I want to deal with this? And sometimes we just need to take just a pause from that place of panic to let's help her find a solution. And that is so, so
Yeah.
important. As parents, I think we just need to slow things down a little bit and not be so hard on ourselves, because we're going to react, especially if we've got a
Mhm.
complex history ourselves. But it's allowing that reaction, but before actually sharing that reaction with somebody else, just checking it and making sure, what is it? If I react in this way, how is that going to be received by my child? What impact
Yeah.
is that likely to have? Maybe not a great impact. So how do I want to do it differently? Hard though, isn't it? It's not easy to do all of that.
Oh, it's super hard. And I think I was blessed at the time that we had amazing child psychologists helping us through like a lot of her trauma and a lot of her issues. So I had a great place to touch base every week. So even when that happened, I went back and I was like, oh my Lord, this happened. This is what I did. And it was great to be able to have them say, yeah, that's great. And here are some more resources, or be
Yeah.
able to provide. I was able to get a lot of support that way, even though I didn't have a village. As far as like, there's no point asking my mom, she would not have been helpful. She would have been horrified. I was able to have that village kind of like through those therapists and through like work mum friends, even though their kids were older. I process a lot by talking. I like to talk things out. And I find it really lovely that I ended up with quite a few mum friends that I'm happy to ask the questions. I don't care if I look like an idiot. I'd prefer to just have all of the information. And they were all, I think we're in a different place now as a society, that mums are so open and ready to help, and not in that sort of like takeover way that our parents might have done it, but just in that, hey, I've got this cool book at home, or have you read this? Have you heard this person? Like even now, there are people who I'll be like, oh my God, I follow this person on Instagram. Go check them out. They've got great information. It's just great to have such a great support base, even though I don't have a family village, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when we don't have a roadmap, and I certainly felt this when I had my children, I was really flying by the seat of my pants. I was like, I've got nothing that I really want to draw from. Or at the time, I felt like I had nothing that I wanted to draw from, because I just wanted to do it very, very differently. And it can be a very lonely road, because you can see everybody else navigating their path seemingly with ease. But in some ways, I'm quite grateful for that because I created my own path that was, and I certainly didn't get it right all the time. Let me just FYI that. um, but I think when you're creating your own path, and I think that's what we all need to do is draw from our experiences, but leave behind the things that we maybe didn't benefit us as children, and bring forward new strategies, new values, new beliefs, new ideas about what our children need today. And that takes me to, you have an 18-year-old and a 2-year-old. So, would I be right in thinking that the younger children, you're doing it differently simply because as a society, we've evolved in the last 20 years, we've learned so much more about neuroscience and how our children's brains work and the emotional development piece. So, am I right in thinking the fact that you've got a lot of history as well, you've got a lot of experience with being a parent, but with your 2 and 6-year-old, did you say?
I think so. Like, I think, yeah, that's that. There's more confidence. Like, I have more confidence in myself, though I know what I'm doing. I have more confidence in my intuition, in that I know that I got it right for her. She's an incredible human being. She's so able to care for herself. She's living away from home at the moment and coming and visiting back from college and whatnot. She's doing great things. And she has the drive I always wanted her to have and the determination I wanted her to have and the need to always look for better, not necessarily not satisfied, but wanting to improve her circumstance. I have a little bit more confidence in my abilities and my intuition when it comes to the boys. But at the same time, so much has changed and they're different as well. But so I feel that even that saying of every parent has a different child, I think that they are my 6-year-old has autism and he is a very different child to my 2-year-old. I did a lot of work early on with him before we even knew he was autistic, really. It was just when he was a tiny baby that I just really wanted him to be in tune with his feelings. I wanted him to know what his feelings were. I didn't want to have, it felt like we have this little clean slate. And instead of having to work so hard that I'd worked with my 8-year-old when she came to me, we had the ability to really build really good solid foundations for him. And so I was always big on emotions. And my husband was raised by his dad. So he was 4 boys raised by his dad, a single dad. And it was a bit more, I think, survival mode. And I think even for him, when he was single dadding, it was a lot of survival mode. And it was a lot of teaching with him of that. He's not going to be tough because you tell him to be tough. He's not going to be tough because you say, come on, I forget you're fine. He's not going to be tough because you dismiss his feelings. He'll be tough because you allow him to have feelings and you identify those feelings and you meet the need for the feelings, and then he's going to be tough. And so it was always a lot of for him. And also he's quite a stoic kid, which probably is the autism now, no contribute, but he would like fall over and hurt himself. And a lot of the time it wasn't the pain of falling over that upset him. It would be his feelings. And so I often would say to him, oh, like come here. And I'd say, is your body hurt or is your heart hurt? And he would say, like, my heart. I'd be like, okay. I said, were you scared? And we'd talk through it and off we'd go. And
Mm.
even now that he's bigger, there are times where he gets really emotional. And I know by the cry that it's typically embarrassment or shame, which I hate that that's just like something that happens without even like people doing it to you.
Yeah.
That like I can tell it's an emotional issue that's upsetting you right now, even though you fell over and your body might be hurting. Your biggest issue is your feelings.
Yeah.
So even now we can't talk to him about his feelings and like he'll be able to say things to me. I remember going to my brother's house for dinner and saying to him, because he didn't talk a lot, say, you need to say hello. If they say hello to you, we need to say hello back. Even if you're feeling shy, you can give them a wave, but we respond to someone who said hello to you. It's polite. And he said, but mom, sometimes I get really nervous. And when I'm nervous, I can't talk.
Mm,
And he was 4. And I was like, I love that you can share that. Or
mm,
he would say he had a blankie, his comforter, and he would say, Mom, sometimes I just need my blankie because it makes me feel safe. So
yeah.
he's very articulate and very capable of telling you about his feelings, which I absolutely adore. My 2-year-old, I don't know, he's wild. I get calls from daycare every day. There's been a little altercation at school today. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, there were some toys and there's a little bit of a scuffle. So I don't know. He's definitely going to be, I mean, he's probably very similar, I have to say. He's going through an embarrassment phase at the moment.
Mm,
And so there'll be times where he might do something or I might say something about his game that he's playing. He's start talking, playing house and he'll talk and say things. And I might respond because often things are mummy and daddy and I think he's talking to me and he'll get embarrassed and he'll scream and fly out of the room.
mm.
And then I had to bring them back and kind of be like, were you embarrassed? Mum is sorry that she
Mm,
interrupted your game. I think you're doing a great job. I think your game was amazing. Thank you for playing. So there's kind of learnings that you take from, I think, every child and every stage,
mm,
but it evolves depending on what's happening in the world and
absolutely.
the child that you have. Because, yeah, Mr. Almost Three has lots of learners and is not afraid to tell me all of them.
So, what strikes me is that you're building a very different relationship with all of your children, your stepchildren, your biological children, your foster child. What is it that you want for them and with them that you didn't have?
I think I want them to know that anything is possible if you work, if you try and put your passion behind it, not necessarily physically but work, but anything's possible. My family was small and they were terrified of change. So if I got a promotion or a change jobs, it'd be like, oh my goodness, but what happens if you get fired? Like, there's all this fear about everything. For me, I want my children to know that I'll always have their back. I'm always behind them. And I want them to know that I'm always here. Even if, say, if you're going to be horrible and say things and hurt my feelings, I understand it's a moment and we can move past that moment. And I want them to be human beings that are capable of that. I want them to be able to have forgiveness and I want them to be able to just connect more. I don't want them to go out into the world like little robots or shut down or unaware of who they are and their impact. I think it's really important that they know that. And I just really want them to know that they have someone that's in their corner. I always say like, so I say now foster step five, but it's just to clarify who they are for you.
Yeah.
In the real world,
They're
they're
your
my
children.
kids.
Yeah,
And a
absolutely.
lot of the time I've had people push back and say, oh, they're not your kids, they're your stepkids. And I'm like, but no,
No,
every child wants to know they belong.
absolutely.
And these girls, they want to know that they belong. They
Yeah.
want to know someone has picked them and has chosen them and is going to stand by them and is going to have their back.
Yeah.
And so for me, like as much as I clarify it here who they are, in the real world, they're just mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it earlier about you want them to have a soft place to land, to know that there's always going to be somebody there for them. I think what you were saying about them going out into the world and knowing who they are, and I think this is where the emotional literacy is really important. Understanding, being able to articulate how they feel, why they feel it, and as parents that we don't react to that. You said a moment ago about if they're giving you a hard time verbally, maybe. Again, our children don't dislike us, but when
Mhm.
they're heightened in their emotions because they're dysregulated, they say things, they behave in ways that we may deem as disrespectful. And actually, it's not disrespect. It's simply that they are experiencing something big for them at that time. And I'm not suggesting that poor behavior is okay. But what I am saying is, as parents, we should be more regulated. And if we can just take a breath and come back to that when they're more regulated, you're likely to get even an apology from them of, "I'm really sorry, mum, I shouldn't have said that." Whereas if we go at them with, "You shouldn't say that to me. You're being so disrespectful," straight away, there's no resolution to that because then both parties have been in the wrong, essentially. So you're more
Yeah.
likely to get a positive response if you just take a breath and go, "Listen, let's talk about this later." When you're feeling
Yeah.
a little bit better and you know where I am when you're ready.
And I think the thing is, as well, it's kind of like that. We're going through a smacking phase at the moment with my 2 year old. He loves to smack and hit
Yeah,
everyone. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's so easy to go back into that pattern of what your parents said,
yeah,
of I'll give you something to cry about. What else? It's hard with, I think, toddlers to know how to parent them because their comprehension isn't as great as you need them to be. Their ability to see consequence is not developed. So it is often that you'll hear, I've said it before, like, if you smack me again, I'm going to smack you. And I think that's so ridiculous.
mm,
How am I teaching you not to smack when I'm smacking him? And I think the same goes with, and I'm guilty of it when the talkback happens, especially in those early, like
yeah,
teenage parenting where you're coming back at them with the same disrespect. And it's what are we
teaching.
modeling?
Yeah,
What are we
yeah,
showing them? And it's really hard. And I make mistakes all the time. I have friends who are like, oh my God, you're just, I'm like, no, like, I'm winging it.
mhm,
I'm just trusting that what I'm doing is right. And I'm looking at what's working and what's not working. I still have days where I'm screaming like a banshee at my children. We
yeah,
all have days where we just
yeah,
absolutely admit, why have I got to this level
yeah,
before you have moved and doubled my miles?
yeah,
But then we have a lot of days with like reconnection where it's not my mum would have lost her mind and too bad we deserved it. Whereas a lot of the time, like I will reconnect with my kids and be like, hey, I'm really sorry, mom. I was really cranky and whatever it happens to be and work it out from there.
But repair, I think, is really important. And we're fallible humans. We're going to make mistakes and we're going to get stuff wrong. And we are shaped by our histories. And that does bleed into the way in which that we parent our children. But none of us likes losing our cool. None of us like, especially not our children, but it's how
Mm.
we repair from that. And I think being able to apologize to your child is so important because
And
nobody,
it's hard.
it's really hard, but nobody deserves to be screamed at. We've all done it
Yeah.
and we all do it. But nevertheless, nobody, we wouldn't like somebody screaming in our faces, would we? And as you just said, I mean, our brain processing doesn't actually complete. So when we talk about those consequences, so children don't understand consequences when it comes to the things that they do. And that process in the brain doesn't actually complete until we're 25. So if we all look at before 25, we can usually see where we've made some really pretty poor decisions and messed up. And that's simply because our brain doesn't align in the way that enables us to be able to see the consequences to that action in an easy format. Whereas as adults, we're more able to do that. This has been such an interesting conversation, Tara. I so appreciate it. I do have one question for you. What is one piece of advice that you would give parents when it comes to when they think about the way in which they were parented and how they want to do it differently? What's one piece of advice that you'd give them?
I would say just ask yourself, what would your parents have done? And then sit with that answer and think how you would have felt because that's all you really need to know. I feel like once you know what your parents have done and you would have felt like that consequence yourself, it's easy to kind of do the opposite and find another way.
And I agree with you because I think it's a feel, isn't it? Because often many parents will go, well, my parents did this and it didn't do me any harm. Just for a moment, take yourself back to that moment that that thing happened, and you'll probably find it was quite hard and it was quite difficult emotionally. So sometimes our narrative and what our logical mind is telling us is different to what our emotional being is. And you're right. I think if we can just sit with that
Mm,
for a moment, we then have the answer as what not to do. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Tara, for your time. I so appreciate it. And I will be adding all of your socials to this podcast so that people can access you. We didn't get a chance to speak about your business and what you're doing, but what we'll do is we'll attach everything to this podcast so that everybody can get in contact with you if they would like to.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.